Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Friday, the 26th of January. In chapter 26 of Acts, we continue with Paul's imprisonment in Caesarea. King Agrippa had come with his wife Bernice to meet Governor Festus, newly appointed, and Festus tells him about Paul, and he says, I'd like to hear him. I've heard of that. Clearly he'd heard about Paul, so he wanted to listen to him. The next day, Paul appears before them to state his case. And in verse 12, as he recounts his testimony to them, he says he was persecuting the church and going to arrest people and have them thrown in prison and executed. And in verse 12, he says, on one of these journeys, I was going to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests. About noon, King Agrippa, as I was on the road, I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, blazing around me and my companions. We all fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. Then I asked, Who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, the Lord replied. And as I read that, I thought, it's a passage that I've read often. It's a truth that I know. And it's one of the great things about Scripture. That's how often we can read something and it just stands out. It's a passage that you've read many times before, and just suddenly it's almost like it catches the light in a new way. And here we have Paul saying that he has this voice saying, why do you persecute me? Now, Paul wasn't persecuting Jesus. He'd probably never seen Jesus. We don't know whether during Jesus' ministry, if Paul had ever been part of the crowds that heard him, he might well have heard him in the temples. Paul was a good religious man, so he may well have seen Jesus when he was alive, but he certainly had nothing much to do with him at that point. And now Jesus was dead. He's not touching Jesus. It's Christians that he's after, and he's busy arresting Christians and imprisoning Christians. And yet Jesus, as he appears to Saul, says, you're persecuting me. I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. And that was just this wonderful picture of how Jesus identifies with his people. The Christians are his body. They are part of Jesus. And so what you do to them, you're doing to him. And Jesus says the same thing in the parable of the sheep and the goats. He says, whatsoever you do to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you do to me. And as I read that, I thought, what a wonderful glimpse of how we matter to God. And that we are part of his body, and what people do to us as Christians, they do to him. That's how much we matter to him. That's how important we are. That's how God identifies us. We might not identify ourselves like that. We might think we're weak Christians. We might think we ought to do better. We've got all these pictures of ourselves. But Jesus says, what you do to the least of these brothers of mine, you do to me. And he says, Saul, why are you persecuting me? What a wonderful place to be, that we are his body, and he holds us as part of himself. Be blessed.